Welcome to War and Untold Stories. Here, we explore the hidden side of war history. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine a land of ice and snow, a vast empire stretching across 2 continents, ruled by an all-powerful Tsar. This was Russia at the dawn of the 20th century. But beneath the glittering facade of the Tsar's palaces, a storm was brewing. This empire was built on the backs of millions of peasants, trapped in a cycle of poverty and hardship. While the aristocracy lived in splendor, the common people endured brutal winters, meager harvests, and a system that offered them no hope. The air was thick with tension, a sense of injustice that was about to ignite one of the most transformative events in modern history. This is the story of how an empire of suffering, ruled by a divine right monarch and fueled by desperation, spiraled into a revolution that would reshape the world forever. Life for the vast majority of Russians was a daily struggle for survival. Imagine spending long, grueling days toiling in frozen fields, only to see most of your harvest taken to feed the cities and the army, leaving your own family hungry. This was the reality for over 80% of the population. Meanwhile, in the lavish halls of the Winter Palace, Tsar Nicholas II and his family lived a life of almost unimaginable opulence, seemingly oblivious to the suffering of their subjects. They hosted extravagant balls, adorned themselves in jewels, and believed their rule was ordained by God. This staggering chasm between the immensely wealthy few and the desperately poor masses created a deep-seated resentment. Whispers of change grew into shouts of protest in the industrial cities, where factory workers faced horrific conditions. The gap between the rulers and the ruled wasn't just wide, it was a powder keg, and the fuse was getting shorter every single day. Then came the Great War. World War I was the final, devastating blow to the already fragile Tsarist regime. Russia, with its underdeveloped industry and poor infrastructure, was woefully unprepared for a modern, industrial-scale conflict. Millions of peasant conscripts were sent to the front lines, often without proper weapons, ammunition, or even boots. The casualties were catastrophic. Back home, the situation was just as dire. With so many men at war, farms lay untended. The already strained railway system buckled under the pressure of transporting troops and supplies, leading to severe food and fuel shortages in the cities. Factories ground to a halt. People were starving, people were freezing, and people were angry. The war didn't just expose the weakness of the Tsar's government. It pushed the entire empire to the absolute brink of collapse. The soldiers began to question why they were fighting and dying for a system that cared so little for them. The empire was bleeding out, and its people were losing their last shred of patience. In the bitterly cold month of February 1917, that patience finally snapped. It started with women textile workers in the capital, Petrograd, taking to the streets to protest the chronic bread shortages. "Down with the autocracy! Give us bread!" they chanted. What began as a strike quickly swelled into a massive citywide protest. Hundreds of thousands of workers and citizens poured into the streets, their frustration and anger boiling over. The Tsar, hundreds of miles away at military headquarters, made a fatal miscalculation. He ordered his troops to fire on the protesters and crush the uprising. But something incredible happened. The soldiers, themselves weary of war and sympathetic to the people's plight, refused. They lowered their rifles, and in a stunning turn of events, they joined the crowds. Regiments mutinied, armories were raided, and the city descended into revolutionary chaos. The very authority of the Tsar, his monopoly on force, had evaporated in a matter of days. The February Revolution wasn't planned by any political party. It was a spontaneous, leaderless eruption of a people who had simply had enough. Faced with the complete breakdown of his authority, the loss of his military's loyalty, and the paralysis of his government, Tsar Nicholas II was trapped. His advisors made it clear the only way to save Russia from descending into total anarchy was for him to step down. On a royal train, stranded and isolated from his capital, the last autocrat of Russia signed the abdication document. With a stroke of a pen, 3 centuries of Romanov dynastic rule came to an abrupt and stunning end. The news spread like wildfire across the empire. People celebrated in the streets, tearing down imperial eagles and symbols of the old regime. The Romanov family, once seen as semi-divine figures, were now placed under house arrest, prisoners in their own palace. A provisional government, composed of liberals and moderates from the Duma, Russia's parliament, was formed to guide the country toward a new democratic future. But the question on everyone's mind was, what comes next? The revolution had toppled a dynasty, but it had also unleashed a whirlwind of competing forces, and the power vacuum would not remain empty for long. Into this chaotic void stepped a figure who had been waiting for this moment his entire life: Vladimir Lenin. A brilliant, ruthless, and dedicated revolutionary, Lenin had been living in exile in Switzerland. But with the Tsar gone, the Germans, hoping to further destabilize their Russian enemy, arranged for his return. He arrived at Petrograd's Finland station to a rapturous welcome from his followers, the Bolsheviks. While the provisional government struggled with the war and internal divisions, Lenin offered a clear and potent message that resonated with the exhausted masses. His slogan was simple: peace, land, and bread. Peace, an immediate end to the hated war. Land, to be redistributed to the peasants. And bread, an end to the starvation in the cities. He denounced the provisional government as a tool of the bourgeoisie and called for all power to the Soviets, the councils of workers and soldiers. His fiery speeches and radical promises electrified the political scene, and the Bolsheviks, once a fringe group, began to gain immense popularity as the only party that seemed to have a real plan to solve Russia's crises. By the autumn of 1917, the provisional government was powerless. The war dragged on, the economy was in free fall, and the people's trust was gone. Lenin knew the time was right to strike. On the night of October 24th, under the direction of Lenin, and organized by the brilliant Leon Trotsky, Bolshevik Red Guards began to systematically seize key points in Petrograd: telegraph offices, railway stations, bridges. There was surprisingly little resistance. The final act was the storming of the Winter Palace, the seat of the provisional government. In a scene that would become iconic, Bolshevik forces infiltrated the palace and arrested the ministers. It was less of a heroic battle and more of a swift, decisive coup. The next day, Lenin stood before the Congress of Soviets and declared that the Bolsheviks had taken power. The world's first communist state was born. The October Revolution wasn't a mass uprising like in February. It was a meticulously planned seizure of power by a disciplined and determined political party, changing the course of the revolution and the trajectory of the 20th century. The Bolshevik seizure of power was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new, even bloodier chapter. The revolution plunged Russia into a brutal civil war. The Reds, the Bolsheviks and their Red Army, fought against the Whites, a loose and disunited coalition of monarchists, liberals, and foreign powers who all sought to crush the new communist state. For nearly 3 years, the country was torn apart by unimaginable violence, famine, and terror from both sides. Cities were destroyed, millions perished, and the ideals of the revolution were often lost in the savagery of the conflict. In the end, the discipline and unity of the Red Army, along with their control of Russia's industrial heartland, led them to victory. From the ashes of the old Russian Empire and the crucible of civil war, a new entity emerged: the Soviet Union. The revolution, which began with cries for bread and justice, had created a totalitarian superpower driven by a powerful ideology that would define global politics for the next 70 years. The dream of equality had come at a terrible price, and its legacy continues to shape our world to this day. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that made us who we are. We'll see you in the next one.